thank you so much for taking your time out and
Thanks for having me.
And doing this. I really appreciate that. You help a lot, and you want to do this, and you push it through with me. I think not a lot of my interviewees need to go through a lot of levels to get this approved. So we got it. Thank you. So
I think we're talking about fun things, so we should be okay.
Yeah, I appreciate this. I just want to know.
Yeah.
So I think let's just start with the first question, which is you have done many things from working in the government sector to writing poems and books, and on your TED talk, so I saw the whole image, and then you give yourself the label of being a polymath and a positivist. So let's start with one term first. So how would you define polymath?
So first of all, I didn't give myself the name. The TED organizers decided to apply that to us. Sure, but I don't disagree with it. I think it's probably not a bad description, because polymaths are supposed to be people who work with different disciplines. They're not defined by a narrow focus. They're defined by broad focus on multiple sectors, multiple disciplines, multiple perspectives. And I think that does describe to quite a large degree what I do. And a lot of it actually comes from the kind of family that I come from, because my family is very, very mixed. My dad is half Tamil, half Eurasian, so there's a bit of Portuguese in there from way back when. My mother is half Malay and almost half Pakistani, with a smattering of Chinese.
Wow.
Yeah, so we're a very, very diverse family. And from very young, I realized that boundaries don't really matter. That I don't have an easy label for myself, because if you want to label me, then you need all sorts of dashes, with all the multiple different ethnic groups. And I figured, okay, if that's the case, then that's what I will be, I don't have to worry about the labels and the boundaries. I will just work with what is there. And I think that's applied later on into the kind of work that I've done. I try not to be focused on a narrow boundary, but to deal with multiple different sectors and how they interact with each other.
And so, I guess when you grew up, you saw the idea that it's really hard to label yourself. So, but that being said, when did you really start taking on the label of being a polymath? Is there a tipping point for you?
I won't say it's a tipping point so much as a gradual accumulation of the identity. So when I was in school, I realized that I wanted to try many different things. I wanted to work on, for instance, poetry at work, but I also wanted to try and be reasonably good at mathematics, and then work on the school newsletter, do community service, do stuff within school as well as with Mandaki and Sinda. And so I realized that the boundaries don't actually matter. And it was more a gradual accumulation process of these many different identities. And then after a while, I realized, okay, they actually sit quite well, and they don't have to be mutually exclusive with each other.
And do you have, because the reason why I asked is that I personally struggle with it. So I only recently took on the identity as a generalist, which I think quite the same. I mean, is there a difference? I mean, for me, it feels the same.
Yeah, I think they are similar.
Okay.
Polymaths are generalists, except that I guess a polymath would try and go quite deep into a few areas as well. Some people will say that a generalist might stay, they won't go as deep into different areas. But I think at their best, a generalist is very much a polymath.
Gotcha. Yeah. So the question was, I only took up that term, the identity sort of earlier, maybe last year. Yeah. And I find it fantastic, right? It's great, and I guess more than just taking up, I really think that's the strength. That's a core strength, right? Yeah. And so, I mean, and I don't know if you feel the same for yourself being a polymath.
I do. There's actually a wonderful TED Talk about this by a woman called Emily Wapnick, who writes about why not all of us will have one true calling. And that the generalists, or the people who have multiple interests, or the polymaths, to use another phrase, are the ones who will be able to draw insights and innovation from across different sectors. They might use the work they do in music to innovate and give insights to the work they do in mathematics. They might use something that they work on in public sector, as I do, to inform their community service. They might use their poetry to inform their public sector work.
This is Emily, A-M-E-L-I-E?
E-M-I-L-I-E, Wapnick, W-A-P-N-I-C-K.
Okay, I think I might have, she writes a blog.
Yes, that she does. She does.
Yeah,
so she's a big pusher for people who don't have single identities.
Was that, would you say that was the point at where you really took on that term, or was it did it come way
no,
before?
I think I've been doing this for a long time. I watched Emily's talk maybe a year and a bit ago, and I remember watching it and thinking, yes, you have given a name to something that I feel a lot of my friends and I have already been doing for quite a while. And I think that's great, when someone gives you language to understand what you've been working on so far. Yeah.
That's fantastic. And I guess also with your current situation, you need to be pretty well versed in various fields of studies and spread across different industries. So, if you've been thrown into an ignorant land, just maybe, I'm not sure what, you sound to be really good at everything. So
no, we're all learning.
Maybe trees,
right? For example, right? And you want to quickly learn about that to maybe go to talk to some arborists. What would be the process looks like if you really quickly only maybe let's say a time frame of a week to catch up?
That's a great question. I would start. See, I'm a reader at heart. I learn best when I am reading and slowly digesting material. So I think I would try and set aside at least a few hours, if not a day, for myself to read around something. And that might include not just books, but things on Google, online resources. But what I would probably do is email a few friends, first of all, who I know to be experts, and say, I'm working on this. Can you all help suggest good websites or good books that I should look at, good articles? So I would start with some of that reading. Then I might also put something out on Facebook just to kind of canvas the hive mind of it, and just say, these are the questions I'm interested in. Can people suggest things? Because apart from the friends I would have approached, I suspect there'll be a lot of other people in my network who might be able to suggest ideas to me. So I put that out there, and then you see what comments come back. Maybe people will give me a website or a link or an article they themselves wrote, or put a comment in that would end up being useful for me. So I would crowdsource a bit, and then finally, in the last couple of days, what I would also try and do is go and talk to people, because I find that I learn a lot when I'm having a deep, intimate conversation with a person. A bit like this interview, right? Where we're sitting down and having a deep conversation where we explore things in some detail.
This after you have sort of crafted out some questions that you want to answer.
Yes, I
looking for the right person to answer those.
Yeah.
That's interesting. And if it's an arborist, say for example, and we throw you into M Park what are some of the topics that would be? This is on the fly. Yeah.
Sure.
What are some of the topics that would sort of like fascinates you about trees, and maybe some of the questions that you'd be asking this specialist?
Well, that's an interesting question. I've never actually thought about that. Well, the first thing I would ask them some technical questions, I suppose. What is the nature of the field? What are the most recent scientific trends that they have discovered? But I would probably ask that we walk around, maybe walk around the Botanic Gardens or one of our parks, so that it doesn't just become a theoretical conversation in a room, but we're actually living the trees, with us. And so I would actually probably try and do that kind of walk as much as possible. And then I would also ask them some other questions that are a bit broader, but that hopefully will give insight to the work that they do. So I would ask them things like, what makes them happiest when they're at work? What are the things that frustrate them most? Who are their most important allies in the work that they do? And I think those are oblique questions, but they would sometimes generate useful insights into what the overall field is about as well. Especially questions like what makes them happy and what frustrates them.
Yeah. Those are good questions, actually. Great.
So if you ever interview an arborealist, you can ask them some of that.
Yes.
Yeah.
And in fact, I think those questions are pretty general for any specialist.
Absolutely.
And anyone, actually, in fact.
Yeah.
And it will bring out very good topics of conversation. In fact, if anyone, because I was just speaking to Violet, William, who runs Lunch Actually, right?
Mm-hmm.
This whole dating thing. And I bet those questions are great for first dates as well.
Yes, I suspect so. They're non-threatening and broad enough.
Yes. And I want to get your opinion on this because, I'm personally curious of it, because more people would say that they are either left-brain or right-brain. And one being artistic and one being very methodical.
Yeah.
So what do you think of it? Is it because you being, you are both? Like, yeah, I would like to think that.
I try to be.
Oh, yes.
Definitely try to be. Yeah.
So do you think? What are your stance on it? Like people saying that they are either left or right. Do you think that's a limiting belief that they put on themselves, or?
I think it is possible for people to be a bit more right or left brain. That we probably all have natural preferences, things that we are good at without as much effort, for instance, as other people. So natural gifts, for instance, or natural preferences and inclinations. But I suspect we can always learn to build up the skills in the other side of the brain as well. So I'll give you an example. Like you think about how you write, right? And that's a good signifier of which part of the brain is controlling or the dominant side. So if you're a left-hander, your right brain is meant to be stronger, and if you're right-handed, your left brain is stronger.
I'm right-hander.
Right. So your left brain, which is the more analytical side, that's supposed to be the I think the neurotheory behind it. But what I found is that you can learn to write with your other hand. For instance, I remember I fractured my arm when I was a teenager, and I had to learn how to write with my right hand because I broke my left arm, and I had to then learn how to use my right arm because I would not be able to write otherwise. And of course, it was very awkward at first. It takes a lot of patient, intentional effort and practice, but you can get there. And now my two hands writing are very different. So that it's almost like they are different personalities or different sides of me, but I use them at different times of the day. So if I want to do quick work, I'll use my left hand because that's my master hand, my dominant hand. I know I'm natural at it. But if I want to do slightly creative work and I want to get myself thinking outside of the box or making my brain work in ways that it normally doesn't work, I will use my right hand because then I'm in a sense using a different part of the brain to focus and to concentrate. So I think it's very possible that we use both sides of the brain. And it's something that can be grown a bit like any muscle. With effort and intentional practice, we can grow it.
And of all the people who are both left and right brainer that you know of, do you think that it is something that they practice, or maybe it's just sort of a youth kind of situation where they just put in a situation that they can practice the musical artistic side and at the same time being engineering, or they're just naturally like talented like that. So I mean the question that I'm asking here is more like, is it
nature or nurture?
Yeah, exactly, right. And if it's one or the other, I mean, I'm personally leaning towards nurture. Then what are some ways that people can wrap their brains around it or start doing something, or you should just say right in the other hand, that put themselves in those kind of maybe growth situation in the other.
Growth situation is a good way to describe it, because I think it's about setting yourself a space to try something that you may not be naturally good at, but that you can acquire skill at after a while. I do think we can all do that. We can set ourselves positions of growth, and this is what the great psychologist Carol Dweck talks about when she talks about a growth mindset, right? That all of us, if we believe that we can learn, and if we believe we can improve by talking to people and by acquiring training, then actually we will be able to grow. But that doesn't mean, of course, that if you have no musical talent at all, you practice a lot, you can become a Beethoven or a Bach or a Mozart at some point. That I'm not sure is possible, but you can certainly become a very good functional violin player or someone playing the keyboard. That I think is possible. Yeah. So I think there is some role for nature, and that's partly us finding the things that we are almost called to do, right? The deep gifts that we are each given. But that doesn't mean that we can't practice, because I've seen many examples of people who they may not be the best musicians in the world, but through practice, they acquire a certain amount of ability. Someone might not be a great mathematician, but they become fairly numerate across time because they develop and practice the skills that are needed.
And have you met anyone who are late polymath or they usually get the term before 20? Late, I mean maybe it's a bit above 30.
Right.
I don't. What do you have you? Maybe.
I've met colleagues, for instance, who say that they've tried many different things, and then after they're around 34, 35, they find the thing that they feel is a really good fit for them, and then they work on that. And so there are certainly examples of that. I've got friends, for instance, from the civil service who've moved into more dedicated planning roles and have stopped trying to be pure generalists. There are others who, they've tried a few things and then they said, no, actually, I really want to be an engineer and I want to focus. But it's not so much a late polymath at that stage. It's more that I think they find that having acquired many different things, because you can't be a polymath from the start, right? You have to draw from different disciplines, and that means giving yourself the space to explore each one of them in some depth. So that alone will take a certain amount of time, I think. But these are people who, by the end of it, will find that, okay, they found a space where they can combine the things they are really passionate about and develop them in a much more deep sort of way.
And so the question is, if you have or have met someone who is, because a polymath can just be easily disguised as someone who just try different things and, don't like to do, or their interests just can't, be settled in one.
Right.
How would you tell them that this is actually a strength versus is actually a weakness? Because for me, I personally feel that way until only recently. Like, do you have any, how will you convince them that it's actually a strength?
Well, the thing I would say is something that we referred to briefly earlier, but I think it's worth developing and fleshing out. It's really the fact that nowadays what we're dealing with, right, is tasks and projects and work that is increasingly complex. Very little work allows you to focus very deeply. Even if you're a lawyer or an accountant where you have specific sets of skills, you will often be working for clients that face complex circumstances, right? That may kind of straddle between the economy and social concerns, that may have multiple areas and sectors of business that they have to work through. And for those things to happen, you need to have interest in those sectors as well, so that you can use your skills in the most relevant, applied way. Same thing with someone who's a teacher, right? They might teach a specific subject, but you're dealing with a student who is holistic. In some of the work that I do, the community areas, we have to plan projects, we have to plan events, we have to manage budgets, we have to make sure that our volunteer relations are strong, and all those require multiple sets of skills. So what I would say to potential polymaths, I suppose, right, is that they need to focus on developing multiple skills so that they can use those areas of knowledge and insight to mutually cross-pollinate with each other. And that the more they do that, the more they will find there is value that they can create.
Yeah. And to just add on to whatever that you have said, which is fantastic, is that I think in this world of too many skills, too much things to learn, at least for me, I can speak for myself, is it's just to follow things that you're interested in. And just pick that as the first thing, and then just until you're tired of that, then go on to the next thing.
It's a good indicator that you will at least be interested enough to make it count for something, and then later on you can cross-pollinate it with other stuff.
Yeah. So we're going to rewind back a little bit
to your childhood. So I was looking through your resume, and I was just blown away by the numerous awards. Comparing to me, I'm just a good progress award, which is, by the way, a little fluke that you just need to score very lousily at the start of the year, and then you score better, then you get $250 like thrown in your lap. So if anyone out there in need of $250, that's how we can do it. Right. So some of it includes you being the top student in Singapore for the GCE O level back in 1995, right? So, why are you such a professional at scoring amazing grades?
Oh, it's a funny question. I'm not sure I am a professional at that. I think the main thing really was that I was blessed enough with a few things. I was blessed with parents who made sure that they encouraged us to do the things we were interested in and to be the best we could be in whatever we chose to do. I think that encouragement counted for a lot because, of course, that's just one exam, right? But there were many moments in secondary school of also struggling and realizing that I wasn't, a lot better at things like English literature and history compared to physics and chemistry, which didn't come as naturally. But this goes back again to what I said earlier, that you can through practice, you can acquire a certain amount of functional skill in a range of different subjects, and make sure that you are reasonably competent at all of them. So I think the encouragement to just try our best and keep pushing ourselves and grow was an important part of it. I also had teachers who were infinitely patient, right? Teachers in school who were willing to say, all right, you're good at these things naturally, right? Those things you probably need to put in a less effort for. But there are other things where you will have to strive a little more, put in a bit more practice. And those were the things I tried to work at. And that kind of encouragement counted for a lot as well. And when you have that combination, parents and teachers who are so encouraging, I guess I was thankfully interested enough to also take them up on the encouragement and make sure that I pushed myself as much as I could.
And when I listen to your Q&A,
even now, right, I'm always astounded that you can bring out names that just like, wow, like I would have never remembered the lady's name, say for example, on the TED Talk. And so, I'm actually asking for myself, is there anything that you do that allows you to remember even how to spell the name, right?
It's an interesting question.
Because I would never be able to name the name of the TED Talk, although I know what exactly was TED Talk because I watched it before. Yeah. So I mean, is there something that you?
To be honest, right? First of all, I guess if I'm struck by something, what I try to do is make sure that I have an easy way to find that information again. So with things like the TED Talks, or whenever I come across anything interesting, I actually have a Google Doc, which I call Interesting Ideas.
Okay.
And then I will do a quick 2-sentence summary of the idea and just leave it there. And then every now and then I look back through that Google Doc. Because the nice thing is you can look at Google Docs on your phone now, or when I'm on the train, when I don't have anything else to do, I'll just do a quick scan. And then when you do that a few times, the ideas tend to get reinforced. So I'm a big believer in that the brain is built not to remember, but to think. Right? So I try and focus on thinking for the brain, but when I need to remember stuff, I externalize that in my memory and I go into my Google Doc and I just read through what's already there. So it's like a safe space where I store all the ideas that I find interesting. Yeah.
I do the same
on Evernote, actually.
Right. Yeah, exactly. So you can do it on either of those, I think. Yeah.
But I mean, sure, idea, I get it. But then what about like names of people? Like,
well, I'll put the name there as well.
Okay.
So I might say something like, interesting idea about polymaths and people with multidimensional interests. And then I'll put the Emily Wapnick TED Talk, right? So that when I see that, I tend to associate those two things with each other.
And this list is ever growing.
It's ever growing.
So
growth mindset, right? So it has to keep growing.
Yeah. I mean,
do you like later on like plug this into like another thing, or once you remember it, or the new ideas of interesting ideas has not as expired being interesting? I'm just thinking about how I can
manage it. Right? Yeah, it's an interesting question. I tend to leave the whole document there, but I put the newer stuff right at the top.
Okay.
And then, every now and then, what I will do is I'll look through the thing. If I have, say, a couple of hours over either a weekend or when I'm on vacation, I might just set aside 2 or 3 hours for myself to go through this document and then reclassify and cluster the material somehow. Yeah, and to say, okay, actually now I'm seeing that there's a connection between idea number 2 and idea number 17, right? And then putting them together and creating a new kind of cluster of ideas.
So you create a new document or just...
No, I'll do it in the old document. And then I'll keep adding a set of new ideas into the new section as well.
So that's kind of like tagging of...
Yeah, it's essentially tagging. Yeah.
Oh.
One of my friends, actually, a guy called Jerry Michalski, who lives in the west coast of the US, he actually uses the Brain software that's out there. There's a software called the Brain. So his brain is externalized. It's essentially a software for mind maps that he puts in more and more material all the time, including things like links and PDFs and tags. So everything that he knows is actually externalized there. So mine isn't quite as detailed as that. For me, I keep just the really interesting stuff in this document.
Okay.
But Jerry's brain is actually right out there. You can look it up online, actually, and you see that.
Oh, okay. So,
okay. Let's just, so I can find it on Google. So what should
just Google Jerry Michalski brain and you will find it.
Jerry Michalski brain. And then Michalski, how do I...
Michalski. Okay,
I wouldn't remember, but it's on audio now.
So. Okay, that's when you don't have to worry about remembering. You just send me a WhatsApp and I'll tell you what it is.
And going back to your childhood a little bit, I mean, if you can paint us a picture, how does that look like growing up?
Interesting. That goes back, I guess, to the earlier thing I said, about diversity and the kind of family that I was very lucky to be born into. Because growing up was... So we moved to this place when I was in primary 1. Yeah, so I was born in Jalan Kayu for a couple of years and we stayed there, and then after that we moved to Bedok North, and then we moved here after that when I was 7, 1986. And growing up was, to be honest, mostly a lot of fun. I mean, I had my first brother when I was 4, the next brother when I was 7, plenty of young cousins to play with as well, and we had a lot of fun. It was just a lot of running around, a lot of games, and also a lot of realizing that each of us was slightly different, but that the differences made for a more diverse and more interesting experience. Because it would have been so boring if we were all the same.
Was there a favorite game back in the day?
There was no single favorite game, I think. There were times one of my aunts lived in Jalan Kayu in the old British camp. So sometimes my uncle would bring a tent and we would pitch it and just play there for the whole afternoon. Because one of my uncles, used to be in the army, and so he had a lot of good skills with that. And so I remember we bought a tent. It was a kind of fun place for the kids to hang out in. There was that. We used to go kite flying in the back of that house because there was a lot of space. There were lots of visits as well. We would go out to the zoo. I remember spending long days at the bird park as well, and just being together with young cousins and doing things that kids do, I guess.
Well, it's very different what kids do these days.
That is true. That is also true. Yeah.
Like it seems to be the information is sort of like gathering on the phone.
Yeah.
But what are the key traits of young Aaron? If you were to look back,
My goodness, I'm not sure. I remember I used to draw a lot. Draw and write. Yeah, there was a lot of drawing and writing, and I guess the writing certainly has continued today. It's very much a part of my life, and I often say to people, I am a writer. I cannot. It's not something about myself that I can switch off. It's just there, and I guess that's what a calling or a vocation is, right? It's something that you have to do, and if you don't do it, you're not quite yourself. So I think writing is a big part of that. I draw much less, although I do sometimes still sketch. I don't think I'm particularly great at it, but I think drawing is a useful way of also turning on a different part of my brain. So I remember going through some workshops once about something called graphic recording, where you just listen to people and then you sketch what they're talking about. And so sometimes in meetings, one of the things I force myself to do is to not take notes with too many words. I ask myself to draw what's happening instead. And this doesn't always work, right? Some meetings you have to just write down quick things, especially if it's a very brisk meeting where there's lots of follow-up. Yeah. But every now and then, if I go and attend a conference, for instance, or if I'm listening to some new insights, or if I'm watching a TED Talk and I happen to have pen and paper, I might take notes for myself, but just sketch them instead. Because I think that turns on a part of the brain that, again, I don't normally use, and that is quite handy. It's a fun way to just grow a different muscle. So there's some drawing still, but writing is clearly the main way in which I work on things.
And does this sketching is recorded somewhere, or you just
I have it all in a notebook. That's it.
Oh, okay.
I can show you some later if you want.
Yeah. So drawing, writing, and characteristic, if you were to compare to your cousins, like how do you stand? Because you guys were a little bit different, slightly, right?
Yeah.
How do you stand on that?
I think one other thing I guess I would have to say is that I was probably more introverted than most. I am an introvert at heart. I gather my energy on my own, and that doesn't mean I don't like being with people. I love being with people, but I need to recharge my batteries either alone or in a small group of people with whom I'm quite comfortable already. And that could be my family, it could be close friends as well. And I suspect, compared to some of my cousins, some of them are quite introverted as well, but I did notice that every now and then I would just need to do my own thing. I'd go off on a walk by myself, or I'd be quite happy curling up with a book as much as I was out playing with kites and being in the tent. So I did notice early on that I would need that introverted space. And again, that's a language that I only really began to understand much later on, that introversion is just a personality preference. And once we understand it, we then know how to gather our energy as best as possible.
Yeah, I think one of the books that I really like, definition of introvert versus extrovert, is by Susan Cain.
Yes,
Quiet.
And she meant another good TED Talk.
Oh yes. Highly recommended it. And she talk about introverts having a huge funnel where they just get all the external sort of stimulation in.
Yeah.
And versus extrovert have actually a more narrow funnel where they can have a lot more that comes in, but they only take in less. So they actually have more, I guess, energized versus introvert overwhelmed.
That's right.
Yeah.
It goes back to what I said earlier as well. Remember when you asked me about the arborealist, right, and how I would approach things? And I said I would start by reading. That's probably a more introverted trait than most, because it's starting by myself, exploring, making sense of things, and then only after that will I go out and talk to lots of other people. You might find that a more extroverted way of doing it might be to just talk to lots of people first and then use that as a way of funneling the information. And neither is correct, right? You just find ways to do it that work for you.
That you also, take on
the later part where you also talk to people, which is, I think, a very, very important aspect of gathering information. Versus, maybe I would consider myself more extrovert, where I'll just ask about information first versus reading. But you need to have both.
Yes, I think that's the key, right? That real balance, intellectual balance, emotional balance, psychological balance comes when we are reasonably able to work with both parts of our personality. And I do think introverts have to learn how to be extroverts at some point, and that's what we call learned extroversion. And extroverts, I think, at some point will also realize they want to be alone and to recharge, and both of that's okay. It's just how we operate.
Yeah, but actually, you know what?
That's very interesting. I'm going to dive in a little bit into that, which is, as an introvert, how did you learn to be extroverted? I mean, in whatever learned extroverted.
Ooh, that's a great question. So there's a few things. Debating was actually a very good thing for me. I did a lot of debate when I was in school, especially the second half of secondary school and JC. And debating was great because it was a way of helping me to articulate my thoughts as clearly as I could, and then be able to communicate them to sometimes quite a large audience, right? And it leads to and in a high-stress competitive environment, yeah. And it's actually quite interesting because quite a few debaters are actually very introverted, because successful debaters don't just talk, right? They have to know how to listen as well. And quite often, that skill of listening is something that introverts bring with them. Not that extroverts can't do it, they can, but it's a more natural skill, I think, for many introverts. And so debating was a very key part of it. And then certain student activities, I was a school prefect, for instance, and being interested in leadership as well meant that every now and then I would be out there, in positions where I would have to communicate with quite large groups of people, not all of whom I know, and therefore not all of whom I'm comfortable with already. And there again, it's a question of practice. I think I keep going back to that theme of how when we practice, we can actually learn to do things and acquire at least a basic level of functionality at it. And extroverting was very much that kind of thing. Just learning how to do it. I was a diplomat for a while when I was in the US as well, and in the foreign service. And there, you have some things that introverts need to be very good at, right? The ability to write reports and send analysis home. But how do you get your information? You have to talk to people. And sometimes that means being able to walk around in a big room, either at a reception or a conference or some other kind of event, and be able to work that room. The image of working the room is really an extrovert skill. And it's something that I've slowly tried to acquire a little bit more competence at.
What are some of the best resources one can look into to learn extraversion? Because you talk about a few areas that they could, put themselves at to learn it, right? Like debating, but I don't know if they have the time to ever do that. I mean, especially when you're out working, right? So sure. Other than that, is there anything that, as an adult, is there anything that they can, a spot that they can put themselves in or a resource they can learn? Well, I think firstly start with reading Susan Cain's book, Quiet.
Yes, because then once you understand introverts, you will understand what extroverts are as well. And Susan Cain does give some ideas, right, of how introverts can acquire these extroverting skills, even if they're not naturally extroverted. But what I would also say is, I don't think you learn about it theoretically. It's like trying to learn how to run, or learn how to swim. You have to do it. And it's only in the doing that we acquire the ability to build up the muscles. And muscles is the right way to think about it, I think, because you're making it stronger each time through constant use. And if you don't use it, at some point the muscle will start to tear away, right? As all of us who haven't been to the gym for a while and then go back will suddenly realize, So I think the key is do it, and do it in all the ways that you are allowed to or find it easy to do, given your work, So if there's a new person, right, go and talk to them. That may not be something an introvert is naturally ready to do, but kind of starting up that conversation is one way of developing the skill. And once you start doing that, it gets easier the second time and the third time and the fourth. Put yourself in situations where you're giving a presentation, right, and then taking questions during a meeting. That's quite an extrovert skill as well. And again, it's something that introverts can acquire more than basic competence. I've seen introverts do this very powerfully because they've prepared well and they know how to use the material.
Yeah. Coming out from RJC, Raffles Junior College, what attracted you to choose those fields of study when you are in Oxford? And also maybe to frame that question better is, why did you choose Oxford as well than the rest? Because you literally have a pick of any university. I mean, I don't know, but I don't want to put words into you.
No, fair enough. Yeah, I chose Oxford quite early on, actually. So the reasons were actually quite simple. I knew I needed to do something in the humanities. And when I say I needed to, what I mean is I knew that those were areas I was deeply passionate about and interested in, and that I knew I would have fun exploring. So I was in the humanities program in RJC and working on history, literature, and economics.
How would you define humanities? I mean,
so literature, history, and economics, and geography. At A level, I think those are the key examples. Yeah. I knew that those were things I cared about, and so, as you said earlier, right, we do stuff that we're passionate in, and that I think helps us to be meaningfully engaged and happy. And so I knew I wanted to do something in that sphere. I thought about being a lawyer for a while, especially given I used to debate. Lots of people say debaters become lawyers, which some do, but not all.
True.
Many debaters do other things as well. Yes, exactly. But many debaters do other things. And I realized a few things. One was I didn't want to be a lawyer. I wanted to study some of the fields in the humanities in a bit more depth. So law is great, it's a professional degree, but I didn't want a professional degree. I wanted to enter public service because I was quite clear that I enjoyed the idea of being part of something that was larger than myself. So contributing to bigger causes, and public sector work seemed like a good way to do that. And therefore, the degree that Oxford had, philosophy, politics, and economics, was in a lot of ways the most natural one to do. That's a degree that has been, it's described as what Oxford calls modern classics. So it produces many civil servants who move on into either political or public sector life, in the civil service. And I thought, yeah, I like that, right? The other reason I wanted to explore it is because I didn't really want to do a single subject in my degree. Going back to the idea of polymath type behavior, right, or being interested in multidisciplinary work, I wanted a degree that would help me explore those connections, to look at how different areas, so in this case philosophy and politics and economics, interacted with each other to produce complex outcomes in a society. And I felt that studying any one of those by themselves would not have given me that combination. So there are very few places in the world that offer that particular combination as a single degree, and Oxford seemed like the right place to do it.
What were some of the more
big lessons or important lessons that you learned at Oxford? I don't know how to pronounce this. I'm going to bastardize the Blavatnik School of Government.
So the Blavatnik School was more recent, actually.
Okay.
Yeah, that was where I did a master's degree in public policy. But the original degree was in Somerville College, which was the undergrad program in philosophy, politics, and economics. Yeah, and the key lessons, as an undergrad, the big lesson that I think I learned was to continually look for the connections amongst the disciplines, because that wasn't always something that was readily told to us. The lecturers would introduce the content for their own discipline, but they wouldn't always find the connections. And that was up to us to look at based on the particular subjects that we chose to do and the particular electives that we picked. So finding those connections was a key part of it. The other thing was that we did a lot of writing.
Let me dive into that a little bit.
So they didn't spell it out to you that you should be finding the connection.
No. Yeah.
When did you know that it was important and I mean, I guess you really wanted it.
I instinctively wanted it, that's right, because that's why I picked the degree. And then I remember when I got there, I thought, okay, if this is not happening for us, then maybe we can find ways to do it ourselves. And, the introvert way of doing it would be to sit down and mull on it for a while and think it through, which I enjoyed doing. But every now and then I tried to also go and talk to people, right, and just get the cohort together, a few of us discussing things and figuring out, how do I learn from what you are gaining as your insights, and how can I share my insights with you? So those sorts of connections were useful as well, I think.
Okay. So you were just saying the other point?
Yeah, the other point was about writing, because the crazy thing about Oxford, not just crazy, but also the wonderful thing about Oxford, is that you are said to read for a degree. You don't study something, you read philosophy, politics, and economics. So you read history, you read English literature, because there's a lot of reading to do. And the reading is then channeled into essays that you write every week. And some might say that, that's not a very great simulation of life. But actually, I found it a very useful set of skills to build up. Because when you're writing, you're processing and thinking and coming up with an independent argument each time, which I thought was a very, very useful thing to do. Because now, in public sector work, or my friends who are consultants, we often find that we have to do that. We have to read very fast, digest quickly, and then distill things into a 2 or 3 or 4 page report. So it's made me a little bit less scared of deadlines as well. Because I feel like I know I can, right, if I need to produce something reasonably quickly. It may not be perfect, but that's okay. It just needs to be good enough. I don't think it needs to be perfect.
And on the note of reading,
because that fascinates me. I read so slow. I have no idea how slow I read, like a snail. What are some of your reading skills that you have acquired?
Well, to be honest, I don't think slow reading is a bad thing, because sometimes I think we skim too much in this day and age. Everything's on the phone. It's so easy to just swipe through an article and just try and catch the main ideas. But I think what I learned as an undergraduate is how to do skimming when skimming is necessary, right? Get the broad ideas of a particular text or article, but also figure out, okay, on this idea, I want to go deeper, right? So I need to spend more time on it. And again, it was about finding the right balance between things. During term time in Oxford, I often found that I was running around and trying to do a lot of skimming so that I would get a broad overview of all the different things I was doing. And then once I had picked areas that I was really interested in, wanted to follow up on and do research on, I did a lot of that work either during the vacations or on weekends when I wasn't running around quite as frantically. Because sometimes I think you do need to just slowly read. Take an hour or 2 hours to read 20 pages. And then take notes and really slowly digest the material.
And with the notes,
and you need both.
Are you looking at just the title or then the content page?
No, not just that. I mean, I would at least try and work through an introductory chapter or one or two of the other chapters, but then skim and get the main ideas from the material, but not feel that I had to know all the examples immediately, because you're not memorizing at that stage, right? You're reading for understanding rather than reading for internalization. But the internalization will come later. So I do think fast reading has its place in life and slow reading has its place in life. It's the same at work now. There are some things which I will skim because I know that I may not need to, if it's an article, I might look at it very quickly. But I try and make sure I know where to find it later. If I need to go back to it and I look at it closely, then I'll make sure that I have it stored somewhere.
Yeah, Google Docs.
Google Docs, or sometimes just making sure the link is there on my history so that I can go back to it easily. Yeah.
Do you have anyone in your life that has a huge impact on you choosing your path or shaping your perspective? Yeah.
Many, actually. I've been very blessed with many mentors and people who've given me that kind of guidance and influence. Going right back to primary school, I mean, my form teacher in primary 2 was a woman called Mrs. Daisy Chua, and she really got me started on writing. I think she realized that I could storytell fairly well, and she encouraged it a lot. She made us do a long composition almost every week.
Wow.
Where we could come up with stories. And initially she would just read us stories and have us retell the stories. But after a while we could come up with stories of our own, and those were amazing opportunities, I think, to just learn what words and language can do. So I was lucky there. My form teachers in primary 4, 5 and 6, Mrs. Irene Lim and a woman called Mrs. Molly Low, again, both very, very strong teachers who they would encourage me to focus not just on writing, but to try and be as all-rounded as I could be. To try and get good at even the things I was less natural at. And I think that made a huge difference. When I was in secondary school, a whole bunch of teachers actually were very, very inspiring. There's a woman called Mrs. Lim Jeannie who taught me in Sec 1 and 2 English literature. My English lit teacher in Sec 3 and 4 was Mrs. Rosie Smith. Again, a very strong influence because they both encouraged me to build up the interest and passion that I had in their subject, but at the same time encouraged me to try and learn how to be a good leader, how to serve communities, and not just develop for my own sake. I think that made a difference. My math teacher when I was in Sec 3 and 4, also a man called Mr. Rajaram, who now is administrator at NUS, he also, I think, pushed me to make sure that I acquired skills not just in the areas I was naturally interested in, but in things like mathematics, where I don't think I was the best mathematician in secondary school, far from it, but I was interested enough to at least acquire, I think, a certain functional competency at it. So that helped a lot. My tutors in JC, very strong people. Again, particularly my English literature and my general paper tutors, very encouraging folks. A guy called Jeff Purvis, Mr. Howard Clemens, and Mrs. Nicola Perry, all part of the humanities program, and very encouraging in terms of the way they pushed us to challenge ourselves, to be a little bit innovative in the arguments that we tried to play with, to experiment with new techniques, to try new methods, to have innovative interpretations of the books that we were studying. All that made a huge difference, I think. And then when I went to university, I had two tutors in particular, my international relations tutor, Jennifer Welsh, and my economics tutor, Judith Hare, who both pushed me to stretch as much as I could. I always could rely on them, right? No matter how hard I worked on a particular piece of writing, they would always find what was wrong with it. And they would encourage me and tell me what was strong, but they would then also say, what about this? What about this thing that you've forgotten? And I knew that any question they asked me would always be a difficult question because it would force me to go and read some more or talk to more people and try and find new ways of understanding things. And I think that's what a good education is, right? It's one that stretches us as much as possible.
So it seems like
all these are all very, very good mentors and folks that have been sort of like blessed to be on your journey that have helped you to get to where you are. Are there any mentors that you personally actively seek out?
It's a good question. I guess there's more of that now in the in the civil service or in the world of work. Early on, I think teachers are there, right? And they're wonderful, but they help all of us. But I also do think that if we're more proactive, teachers are often more inclined to give back to us, because they in a sense, you're involved in a reciprocal relationship, and if they know that you're passionate, they're much more likely to encourage. But now in the world of work, I have had sometimes to actively seek out mentors.
And so just to give some frame to it, because I was speaking to all my friends, about mutual friends actually, also telling me that actually in the world of service, there's actually sort of a program where you are forced to find a mentor.
There may be more structured programs out there. I was not part of those. So I remember being assigned things like a buddy, and there are sometimes formal work mentors where you.
Yeah, but you say it's not very productive for him, at least.
Right. And I think a lot depends there on the match, right, between the person and the mentor and the mentee rather. And sometimes that sort of structured matching will work, but at other times, if we haven't thought through the personality fit and the kinds of interests that people have, it may not always be the best fit. And I do think fit between mentors and mentees is a good thing. And an important thing to have. Structure is useful. It's probably better than nothing, but I would say that it's enhanced if people get to choose their mentor. So I've had younger civil servants come up to me and say, can you be a mentor for me? And I'm happy to do that, because I think that that's a better way to do it, rather than try and force fit personalities in an overly structured way. But what I would add is, many of my bosses have been very responsive if I go up to them and just say, I won't ask them, can you be a mentor? Right? Because that seems a bit stilted, I think, sometimes. But it's nice to just go to them and say, if you can spare an hour, right, could we have lunch, and could I ask you some questions about career moves and help me understand certain things. So, former head of civil service, Peter Ho, is someone I think of, as a mentor. Now he's retired, and I think he's mentoring many people, and sharing a lot of the wisdom that he accumulated in his 30 plus years as a public officer. My permanent secretaries in each of the ministries that I've gone to have always been mentoring figures as well, with different styles. But no one has ever said no when I go to them and say, can I have an hour of your time or half an hour of your time just to run some ideas by you and to talk to you about my career plans?
Yeah. No, and I'd just like to underscore this
for people looking for mentors. And I think you bring up a point really well, is that this whole mentor-mentee relationship is very scary for anybody, because it's like a huge time commitment if you think about it. But I think if you were to just frame it as a lunch situation or a coffee situation, seeking wisdom, and maybe the frame of although he or she might be your mentor, but it's just a lunch mentor.
That's right. Yeah, and like I said, you don't have to call it, a very formal capital M mentor, right? You're just saying, let's have lunch, and then I might pick your brains about something, and maybe they will ask you about something, because actually reverse mentoring works too. Sometimes, when I meet my younger mentees, I'll ask them what they're doing, how are they doing in learning coding, and what are the new things that they are interested in, because that helps me learn as well how to stay current and abreast of emerging technologies.
And I guess, what are some key traits that you look out for in a mentor, or maybe for others who are just starting on the journey to sort of have a thought on it?
I don't think I would generalize it. I think you could. It really depends on what you're looking for. If you need mentoring in a very specific field of content, then that should be what you're looking for, right? Someone who has deep expertise in that. But what you're looking for is maybe mentorship on more general things, like how to manage a team, or how to be a good leader in an organization, or how to do innovation in a place like the public sector. Then I would say we need to talk to someone who's got experiences and stories that they can share in those things. Yeah. So it's not so much a generalized set of traits, but I guess at the heart they must be willing to share.
Okay, yes.
Yeah.
So maybe a better question would be, what would be the difference between a good mentor and a great mentor?
A good mentor will be one who's willing to at least have that conversation that I was talking about, who will respond to the questions and share their own story. I think a great mentor is one who will also have the empathy to listen to what their mentee is asking them, and maybe have both the intuition and the sense to understand where they are coming from, and give them some additional advice or guidance that may not come from the mentor's own experience, but at least comes from the reading that the mentor has of the person. So someone who looks at me, or if I look at someone else and say, I don't have experience in what you're asking me about, right? But it seems to me that what you are looking for is to grow in certain ways. And maybe here are ways you can go about doing it.
So it seems like a mix of humility, so knowing that he or she might not be able to answer the questions that you look for, but referring you to the right material,
That's part of it.
and a little bit of empathy and understanding of where you're coming from. Because I think, and that's a big trait for anyone, because a lot of people don't actually listen.
Right.
And for we can be kind of
they listen but they don't hear.
a mentor that listens and prompt further questions. And then come out with an answer.
Or if not an answer, then at least better questions. And ways of finding the answer, because mentors may not have all the answers. Or sometimes the question is one that is so complex that there isn't a simple answer to it. Then if you don't have that, then you need to start asking better questions.
And just on the flip side to being good, let's talk about some most common mistakes of mentoring. When are there any that you because being a mentee for years, are there any common mistakes that I think one being the listening part, right? That's you should definitely listen. Are there any other?
The listening part, I would go as far as to say that a good mentoring conversation should involve the mentee talking more than the mentor, actually, because the mentor should be asking questions and kind of probing into the issues that are being explored before they start sharing or trying to give insights. So listening is definitely a key part of it, or failing to listen is a common error. Assuming that you must have answers is another one, because sometimes a good mentor just helps you to say, well, maybe you're not asking the right question. Maybe you should be asking this question or another question instead. And I don't have answers to that, but maybe that gives you an insight, right? So that I think is useful. Helping people to frame new questions and not always feeling they must have answers. And then the third thing is assuming that you must always share your experiences, because yes, people want to hear your story, but your story might not be completely transferable to their situation, especially these days because change happens so fast, right? Technology changes so quickly. Whether it's in the public sector or in the community work that I do, if I think about when I started doing it, right, in the early 2000s versus what the world is like now, technology has changed, right? The ways in which we interact with one another has changed. We use social media much more extensively now. And that is a world that not all mentors will necessarily be able to work with. Yeah.
Let's do a side step and move into to poetry a little bit.
All right.
When is your first introduction to poetry?
Wow. Definitely in primary school. Except no, that's not true. I think all of us get introduced to poetry when we learn nursery rhymes. Right? We learn about the way words work and what rhythm and music sounds like in language. And so I think it was nursery rhymes, and then going to school and realizing that these are parts of larger stories, right? There are books there that we can read and get exposed to even more of the musicality of this language. So poetry, I think, started there from when I was very young. When did I start writing my own? I think around primary 3, primary 4, lots of rhyming poems that I look at now and I think, they are all necessary pieces. I believe that everything a writer writes is necessary.
Yes.
And sometimes it may not be a great piece, but it's a necessary piece to get you to the next one and the next one and the next one. So that is the idea of craft as well. That you're building up the writing muscle all the time. It started a lot in primary school, and then it kind of got more formal in secondary school with something called the Creative Arts Program. It's a program that MOE and NUS run for people who are interested in writing, and we go through a week-long residential seminar, and then after that, if we're interested, a mentorship program as well. Now, writing mentorship is of course a bit different from the mentorship we just talked about, because there the mentor is actually giving feedback on the writing, and trying to help the young writer to find their voice. And I was very, very blessed to have 2 wonderful mentors when I was in school, both poets, Miss Ho Fan, who used to be a teacher at RJC and has now retired, and Associate Professor Dr. Lee Zhu Ping, who used to be part of NUS and has now also retired. So both wonderful mentors who helped me to, I think, figure out what my own voice was like and how I could amplify that in the writing that I do.
And for someone, because I have zero clue about poetry art at all, how would you introduce poetry to another person? Like how to wrap our head around poetry?
It's a good question. I guess for someone who isn't already acquainted with poetry, right? What would I do? I would start off by maybe asking them what their favorite nursery rhyme was, because I'm pretty sure everybody has one, or what their favorite song is. Okay. Because the best nursery rhymes and the best songs are poetry, right? They're about how words create sounds and images in our minds to convey a certain idea or message, right? And then help them to then figure out what is it that they like about that. And why do you like Mary Had a Little Lamb versus Jack and Jill Went Up the Hill, or any other of the
Eminem rap.
Right, exactly, right? What is it about it that's interesting? And often people will say one of a few things, right? They might say that it's the content, right? There's some interesting lines there that help them to think about the world in a new way. Right? And that's what poets will call similes or metaphors, right? You are using images, and when you say something is as slow as a snail, right? You're using the snail to emphasize what slowness is. That's a tool that poets use. So you might be interested in the content. But some people are interested in the beauty of the sounds as well. What Robert Frost calls sound sense, the musicality of the material. And then realizing that just listening to it, you also get an image of what's going on. Right? So that there are lines in poetry where if you repeat the letter S, for instance, that can create the image of the whispering of leaves, or the whispering of the wind, for instance. And so the sound matters as well. And when you put that together, right, the content, the images, as well as the sound and the music, that's what poetry is about, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, because in writing, there isn't any, maybe poetry falls under one of the subset of writing. And I guess that pretty much shine the spotlight. The 2 points that you just mentioned?
No, I think so. I think those two. All writers would do that to some extent, but poetry in particular needs original images, original content, and sound sense that is particularly beautiful. And the best journalists will have it. The best prose and non-fiction writers will have that as well. In fact, if you ask me, some of the greatest novelists in the world, people like Salman Rushdie and William Golding, their prose is poetic. But people draw artificial distinctions sometimes between that, and then some poetry can be very prose-like in other ways. Yeah.
And on a personal note, what does poetry mean to you in your current season of life?
It's a good question. I've always been writing, I guess, like I said, since I was very young, and I do think of poetry as part of a calling. It's something I cannot choose not to do. I can stop it for a while, but it will always come back. I like to say that the words are kind of swimming around in the head and in the heart, and then eventually they will come out. In fact, I'm a big believer in the fact that sometimes we don't really write the poems ourselves. The poems are actually out there, and the writer becomes the conduit for the poem to be expressed. And it's quite nice when you think about it that way, because that also means that not every poem needs to be utterly and totally perfect, but we are just mediums through which the content is articulated. And that's what it means for me. It's a calling, it's a vocation, and it's something that I don't just do as an analytical thing, right? It's emotional, it's physical as well. Another of my poetry mentors, Professor Edwin Tambu from NUS, he always says that when you read and you write poetry, you don't just write it with the head, right? It's not just a mental or intellectual process. You write poetry and you read it with your whole being. Everything about you is being invested in that poem. And I think that's what it is. That's why you can't turn it off, because it's such a part of everything that the poet does.
Got it. I like it. Give me a good sense of reference now to approach this it's kind of like high-end art, It's when not inside, you feel like just a stupid idiot that go to this event and I have no idea how to look at this paint and try to make an understanding of it. But I think the way how you just said it gave me a very good frame of reference to approach that topic.
It doesn't need to be high-end art, right? Nursery rhymes are not high-end art. Some of the ancient ballads, the songs that we know, they're not high-end. Everybody has access to them. These were things that were sung by the minstrels in villages, or by itinerant groups of performers. And they would move around different parts of the world and sing their songs and recite their poems. That's where poetry started. And I think it'd be really useful if more of us could do that, actually, to get this out to more people, right? And to help people understand that there is poetry in everything, not just in stuff that is obviously high-end.
Yeah, agree. Turning to another point, moving down to, actually this question is a very, very loaded question, so please dissect it however way you want. I have this generalizing theory of people who are very good at academics, they haven't learned to fail yet. And there's a lot of power in being able to fail, and the power of failure. Yeah. And so I have, the theory is that people haven't learned to fail, and then when they're put on this position, they're playing defense, and the problem with playing defense is
playing defense in what?
In their work, in their work, where because I don't want to try this new idea because this old thing still works, kind of situation. So, I mean, just what are your thoughts on that?
I think it's a very powerful question, first of all, because I do think you're right. There is something quite educative about failure, but it's important to not over-glorify it either. When we talk about failure being an important set of lessons and how it's necessary, actually for innovation, right? You can't innovate if you don't fail. You need to experiment, and experiments by nature involve either failing or succeeding. You don't know beforehand which of those is going to happen. So I do think that it's a really important set of skills to acquire. The key is, how do you fail in a way that allows you to learn, right? If you just fail and you wallow in the failure for a while and then nothing changes about what you do, then that's almost a double failure, right? You failed in what you set out to do and then you don't even learn anything from it. But I think it's when the failure comes with reflection that you are able to then say, okay, how do I bounce back from this? What else can I do to operate better, right? Or do things in a different way. So just to give some examples on this, right? I think, for instance, I don't think of the word failure as even necessary now. It's really a case of we really should learn how to do small experiments, right? Test our ideas out so that we do that in a low-cost way. And eventually, we find ourselves in situations where we can do bigger experiments because we've learned from the initial ones. So there was some time ago, for instance, where I wanted to set up a new laboratory, and I called it a gaming lab, right? It's a game lab where in the civil service college, we were using games to teach civil servants about complexity, right? How to manage in complex circumstances. And that kind of thing can be quite a big project, right? It can involve a lot of funding because you need to get resources to hire people to design the games and then to run them as well. And initially, when I remember I broached the idea to some of my peers as well as my bosses, there was a lot of pushback, to say, oh, maybe we don't do this now, let's try it later, are you sure it's going to work? And I remember thinking, okay, never mind, we don't have to start big, right? Let's just start small, right? Try one game first, learn from it, figure out what works and what doesn't work, then try again, apply those lessons, figure out what worked and didn't work, and then keep iterating that material. So rather than think of it as, oh, I failed to start it at the start, I just tell myself, no, if I want to get from here to there are 10 steps in between. I will take the steps along the way, and each time I will learn from them as much as I can. So then what you're doing is you're having small failures produce insight, produce lessons, and produce education, which then allow for ultimately a certain amount of success. Yeah. So I think even the framing of failure is not always the best one that we can use. And this is not to say, oh, we should all set out to fail, but we should set out to experiment. We should set out to learn. And that will come sometimes from success, and sometimes it will come from something that is less than perfect. And if it's less than perfect, then we must reflect on it and figure out what went right and wrong, so that we can learn the next time and the time after that.
Yeah, I agree with you. And yeah, failure is a touchy word. I mean, I still haven't wrapped my head what's a better way to. I mean, you say it as experiment. I think. I mean, some people also say it as steps to your success.
Yeah.
Right?
Yep. And to realize that, if you're, like I said, you're moving from one place to another, it's not a straight line sometimes, right? You might need to take a few steps forward, a few steps back. You might have to go in curly-whirly lines, right? But eventually you get there, right? And we mustn't presuppose that the journey is going to be this neat line. Sometimes it's a really messy process. I'm sure you've seen those diagrams, right, where instead of a line, it's just this mass of just sprawls and curls, and then eventually you figure it out and you get there. Yes. Yeah, and I think that's what life is like, right? Earlier I said something about how we deal much more with complex issues these days, right? And the more complex the stuff is, the more we must allow ourselves to fail. Because it is precisely in those failures that we will learn from the experience and be able to move further on. But I should add one more thing, by the way. When I said earlier that we don't glorify failure, right? What I mean is this. There are failures from complexity, like the ones I just described, which are very useful to learn from. But there's another type of failure, right? That's failure of complacency. And failure from complacency is things like carelessness. It would be things like, when you write a document, you make typo errors in them because you didn't bother to check them properly. It means things like not verifying facts, right? A journalist cannot afford to not verify facts, or someone who's a writer, right? If they don't do their research and they do it in a sloppy way, and then something turns out to be factually wrong. Those are errors of complacency, I think. And that kind of failure, I don't think we should overly tolerate. Because those are things we can easily correct for, right? You correct for it by due diligence, you correct for it through a certain amount of care and meticulousness. So with my team at work and in my community groups, I'm very clear to all of them. I will not tolerate failure from complacency, because those are avoidable failures. But failure from complexity, I'm more than happy to tolerate, because we can't avoid those. We must learn from them.
Yeah, this is a good way to think about it. Yes. And yet here you are, like pushing boundaries and trying out new things.
Trying to, yes.
Yes. Yeah. Just trying to put labels again. In a world where less innovation is happening in the circle. I'm not sure, by the way, not sure. But that's just how the stereotype maybe is surrounding that. What has happened? What event has happened in your life that made you so different from the rest?
I'm not sure that I am that different, to be honest. I know this is a website called MISFITS, so we need to be different somehow, right? But like I said, I guess it's a combination of support in the early years to realize, okay, I can try, right? I've been encouraged to try and do things in a slightly different way. It comes from the fact that I guess I don't have an easy label, So earlier on, it was trying to help people understand that, this guy is kind of Indian, but does some things that Malay people do because he's Muslim, and he's got this Eurasian side of his family, which is also very prominent. Yes. And, I care a lot about all of them. And the idea is then I don't need to fit into an easy box. Then later on, it became, okay, public sector, poet, community work, volunteer teacher. I am all of those things. I don't have to choose amongst them. And I've always felt that because you don't have to choose, then the labels don't matter quite as much, because you are both all and none of the labels at the same time. And I think that's what's helped push me to really say, okay, don't worry about the label. Just if there's important work to be done, let's get it done. And then along the way, in the work at least, or even in things like community groups with Mendaki and Sinda, I've always benefited from having strong mentors and patrons. People who've encouraged me to say, yeah, go ahead and try, right? And then we will give you support if it doesn't happen to work out quite as well. Yeah.
Do you have a favorite failure that in retrospect plant a seed for success later in life?
I do like that question. Favorite failure. Maybe that's what we should all have. Pick a favorite failure so that we don't see them as quite as negative, as
we are trying to frame it very positively. Yeah,
that's right. Yeah, a favorite failure. I know organizations, for instance, that do things give out a glorious failure award. A failure that generates a lot of learning for everybody else. Companies in certain parts of the world that do that, which I think is a very powerful thing. But my own favorite failure.
I mean, we can come back to it. We just let it sit for a while. We can come back to that.
Why don't we come back to it?
Okay.
Let me mull on that for
Yeah. So the next question is, how is the day like being a deputy director in the Ministry of Trade and Industry? How does this your day looks like?
Yeah. To be quite honest, there is no typical day.
Okay.
The work involves a range of things. It involves working with the Economic Development Board on the manufacturing and services sector.
Maybe let's just do a framing into how about the trade and industry. Like, how would people wrap their head around this?
Sure. No, I understand. Yeah, I mean, it's a big ministry. The trade part of it is really about the international connections and relationships that we have, either with countries or with groups of countries, that allow us to encourage more free trade to take place in the world. Because Singapore is a small and open economy, is strongly reliant on open markets and a liberal trading arrangement. On the industry side, which is where my team does all of its work, we are interested in how we grow the domestic economy. Right? And that might include bringing in MNCs to Singapore, but also growing our small and medium enterprises, encouraging startups, making sure that resources like manpower and capital and land are available for industrial growth, and making sure that we have the energy resources to also, grow the economy. Right? In a world, of course, where carbon constraints are getting increasingly acute, right, and where we have commitments internationally to make sure that overall global levels of carbon are actually in the long term going to be reduced. So that's the broad area of the work. The areas that we work on in particular in my team are in manufacturing and services and the tourism sectors. So we're involved in figuring out how do we grow those. Essentially, it's about how Singapore gets marketed as a destination that is attractive for businesses on the manufacturing and services side, as well as for people. And that's what the tourist side is about, Tourists in terms of leisure tourists, but also business tourists and how we can encourage them to be here. So why I say there's no typical day is because on some days I might be working a lot with the Economic Development Board on, their investment strategies and the kinds of companies they're working to bring in. And they do a lot of the hard work, of course, but every now and then, some of the policy guidance comes from the ministry. And then on tourism, that includes things like, making sure that there is enough space for new attractions to be built. It includes making sure that our integrated resorts, on the economic side are doing well and that their attractions and hotels are strong. It includes things like making sure the annual Formula One race goes as well as it can. And of course, we have a wonderful race promoter who does a lot of that work. Yeah. But because we are a night and street race, we have a lot of coordination to do because there's road closures to take care of, security and safety issues. So we try and facilitate the relationship with the rest of the government in terms of getting the right approvals. Yeah. So there's no typical day.
Yeah, it sounds very wide-ranging, from technical problems to global broad strokes of policy making that could help facilitate the growth in those areas.
And very complex because you have to work through other people. I can't do it all myself, right? I have to work through agencies, I work through companies and work through, partners. And I think that's the nature of the most meaningful work these days. The more we want to do things that have scale and impact, the more we have to work through others. Yeah.
Oh, you're so right. And actually I want to do a follow-up to that question, but before that, just a quick one on your personal definition of a civil servant.
Right. That's a good question.
If you were to introduce your work as a civil servant to another person and just work there, okay, what else,
Yeah, that's a good question. So there's a whole range of it, right? There's analysis work that we do, whereby we at heart, the civil servant serves the government of the day, right? And through that, we serve Singaporeans, right? We make sure that that the government works as effectively as it can, as efficiently as it can, but also in a way that meets the needs of citizens. And we do that in support of like I said, the political, what we call the political masters, right? They are the ones who are elected. They have a mandate to enact certain policies and we help them to enact those. But we also do analysis and we will tell them what the costs and benefits are of the things they want to try and do so that we can come to a decision that serves the larger purpose of Singapore as much as possible. So that's the broad role of civil servants. And then within different areas, of course, you will do different things, right? So in the Trade and Industry Ministry, we're interested in how do we grow the economy so that we have jobs for Singaporeans, right? That's the core purpose of what we do. In the Ministry of National Development, you might focus on making sure that land use is done in a considered and effective way so that we maximize the space that we have, because we don't have a lot of space in Singapore and we need, I think, that space to be, as efficiently used as possible. The Ministry of Social and Family Development, on the other hand, will be there to make sure that issues relating to society and family are taken care of, that we give people support where they need it, that those who are in need of particular assistance from government receive it, and that the rest of us are providing enough into the taxes that we pay to have the resources to make those payments. So it's multiple different things, right? And that's why it's so multifaceted. Because we have government encompasses so many different aspects of people's lives.
Yeah, I mean, yes, I can't. It's hard for me to wrap my head around that definition because, like, if I were to meet someone on the street or someone come up to me and and if I were to say that they are, or you should definitely join the civil service, like, what are yeah, what are their key traits, or what are things that they are interested in when you tell someone that they are that hey, you should maybe consider that the civil service.
The best definition I have heard actually comes from DPM Teo, who is the minister in charge of the civil service, and he says that at heart, right, never mind all the individual areas that people are working on, because those are very different, as I pointed out, but at their core, a good public officer is one who derives happiness from the happiness of others. So what matters to you is that you are serving a cause that's bigger than yourself, and that allows you to have, sometimes indirectly, impact on the people around you. That, I think, is at its core what's necessary. Because different people are motivated by different things, right? If you're motivated by a high salary, then the civil service is probably not the best place for you, right? We are reasonably paid, but we're not overly paid, right? And we certainly wouldn't make as much as, say, a management consultant or an investment banker or a high-flying lawyer. And that's fine. Because most of us are not in it for that anyway, right? Some people are in a job because they want the pace, right? They want to constantly be doing something different. And maybe if you want to do that, you might want to be a journalist, right? Or you might want to be doing work that allows you to actually explore those new areas all the time. But if you're interested in doing things that affect causes that are bigger than you, then actually the civil service is not a bad place.
I guess also, being in the civil service sector, you must need to deal with a lot of traditionalists. And I mean, traditionalists might be an innovative person 20 years ago, but in today's day and age might be a traditionalist, what we call traditionalist, right? And what are some of the effective tools in the toolbox that one can deploy to stretch their mind a little bit and maybe change their point of view?
That's a good question, but I like where you're coming from with that question, because you've not assumed, as many people do, that the government is monolithic. Sometimes people assume that there's only one viewpoint that exists in government. I mean, there's 120,000 people in the government. There's going to be multiple perspectives and different views, different interests, right, on each issue that's out there. And you're right, that on some things people can be very innovative, and on others they might be a little bit more traditional. The first thing I would say is that the traditionalist is not always wrong. Sometimes there are good reasons why we do certain things, and we might want to keep doing those. For instance, I'm also probably not an innovator when it comes to things like taxation, right? I don't think you want to be asking people how much taxes they should pay, for instance. I mean, there is a macro decision that we make on what tax decisions are, and I think we should stick to those. But I am a bit more of an innovator when it comes to things like, how do we involve citizens in the policy process? How do we not assume that government always has the answers, but allow for the fact that actually government may have certain biases too, and we want to talk to people so that we understand what their needs actually are, right? So that we can respond to those in the most effective way. And I think we're seeing more and more of this in things like the Singapore Conversation and some of the public consultation exercises that have started for different areas of policy. So how do you convince people of that, right? That it's valuable to do? Because I think that's a very important question. I think the first thing is, don't make it an overly large decision that you're asking people for, right? If you go up to a decision maker and say, I want to spend X million dollars on this new idea, cannot. They're obviously going to look at you and say no, right? Because you've given them no background, you've given them no persuasion on why it's useful. And I feel that the bigger the decision is, the longer you need to give people to adjust to it. It's human nature, right? We take time to get used to a new idea. And the best way to do it is to start, I think, in a very, very slow, you might almost call it a guerrilla kind of method, And what I mean by that is, you just slowly feed ideas into the system. Circulate an article, right? Send a podcast around. Send a link to a TED video or any other video, right? Then you slowly seed the ideas in. Then 2 weeks later, say, oh, that video I sent? Here's another article about it. Here is an example of a country that's actually doing it, or a country that's doing something that we can maybe modify for ourselves, right? Or if there isn't anyone doing it, maybe you can say, that video I saw? I'm thinking about this idea. What do you all think, right? So you're not asking for a decision. You're just slowly seeding material and start a conversation. And then eventually, someone might come to you and say, why don't we do this, right? Or you might be able to go up to them and say, remember that article I sent? Here's how we should maybe we can try and do something about it. Get a like-minded person, what we call a fellow traveler, a fellow traveler along the way. And then along the way, you build the discussion further, and you might be able to say to a senior person, right? Would you support this if we try this? What do I need to do to make the idea better? So again, you're not asking for a decision. You're just saying, if I want to do this, how do I make it better? Right? And you make it a very gradual thing. And then eventually, when you get to innovate, it won't just be your idea. because you've built a movement around you of people who care and are interested and are supporting the kind of work that you do. So it's guerrilla because it's not obvious, right? It's a very slow, gradual process. But I think that is how large, complex systems change. They don't change simply because one person dictates a change for other people. They change best when there is that gradual patience. But for that to happen, the innovator must have two qualities. One, patience, because if you want everything to happen immediately, it will not happen, right? This is a campaign. It's not a simple event where do or die, you must succeed. So you've got to have patience. And the second thing is, you must not care where credit goes. If you care that you are given the credit, then you probably won't be sharing these ideas quite as much. But if you share and other people slowly come on board and everybody gets credit at the end, then your idea actually becomes successful. So the best innovators I have seen are the ones who don't care about who gets the credit.
Wow, I love it. And let me just add something on top of that, which is so 2 points that you made, right? One is why you need to have patience. And the reason why you need to have patience in a huge organization, and I heard someone tell me about this, be in the business or in whatever big organization there is that every action, small actions that a decision to make cause ripple.
Yes.
And if this ripple is not planned well, your idea would fail very, very easily. Yeah. And so it takes great it takes great wisdom to know that the implementation is important, and to know that, and you need to have the foundation is patient. And then the second point you were making was the crediting, about not having an ego on the idea that you have. And I guess a person who really echoes that in one of my interviewees is Jack Sim. And he really, when he do World Toilet Organization, he just do it because it solved a problem and he wants this problem to be solved. And if anyone else want to join him on he's very easy in giving out credits. And he's like, I'm old already. I don't, and again, that's one of the key traits of how successful World Toilet Organization is.
I think so. Yeah.
Being innovative, I guess, you are always on that topic a lot. And I guess the question to you is that, are there any practices or activities that one can take on to be more flexible in thinking out of the box? Because you talk about narrative, right? There's a huge narrative that comes to us, being the little red dot, and that is so ingrained in very deeply rooted, this narrative. And I guess are there any practices that one can take on to sort of like maybe disengage or to test those narrative?
Absolutely. Read, first of all, because that's where new ideas come from, right? At least be exposed to what other people are working on, and the things that they care about enough to put into a book or on a website or in an article are going to be, chances are, I think, useful challenges to our own mental models. But not just that. I do think travel is important. So don't just read and theoretically know about stuff, but go out and see things, right? See what companies are like elsewhere, see what societies are like, see how towns organize themselves and how cities organize themselves. And so don't just go on like a tour, right? But go and visit the back alleys of places and go and explore a place and see how the lived reality of it actually is. So travel is key. Two more things. One, talk to people who make you uncomfortable. Right. So the ones who might give you a slightly odd feeling and you don't know why, but talk to them. Chances are one of the reasons why is because they think in a different way, they see things you don't see, and any kind of pricking at our assumptions can make us uncomfortable, which I think is useful. So putting ourselves in that discomfort is useful. And then every now and then, just doing something that you haven't actually done before. Now, this doesn't have to be bungee jumping, right? But it could be just visiting a new place. It could be trying out a new activity or a new sport. And doing things that you didn't always feel you were naturally good at. And it's okay to suck at it the first time, right? That's fine, I think. But try anyway, right? Because then I think you will learn things about yourself that at the very least will trigger a part of your brain that was not working before. Yeah. And then the last thing, sorry, I know I said two things, but one more actually strikes me as very important. Please. I do think, and this is not going to be obvious, but I think it's important. I think some amount of contemplative practice is also very important. Because if you're only out there doing the new stuff and reading, but not allowing yourself to digest the material, then you might lose some of the insights that come from it. So when I say contemplative practice, I mean things like, it could be, the very obvious stuff is yoga and meditation, where you let your mind rest so that when it comes back into high gear, you will remember and see connections that you didn't quite see before that. That's one way. But another way could also be things like, going on a long run and just focusing on the run for a while, right? So that's a physical kind of contemplation. Some people like to do journaling, right? Where they write down the stuff that they've learned. That's fine as well. But I think having some kind of contemplative practice is useful because it allows the innovation to actually gestate and eventually emerge and be expressed. Because otherwise it can often stay at the back of your mind and not get articulated in any way.
Great. All good answers. Especially, I mean, just traveling is probably the easiest thing, the lowest hanging fruit that one could just take on.
Correct. And travel need not even be to foreign places, right? It could be to a place in your own country or your own area that you haven't seen before. Mm-hmm. Sometimes travel could also be just taking a different route to work.
Yeah, and I just got introduced to this term called the fanoa. Have you heard of it?
No.
So it's a French definition. I probably would be bad at describing it, but basically just walking around the city and having a sort of like, maybe I'm just trying to find 10 old school bus stop in Singapore. Right. And that's sort of like like having an adventure in the same geographical land, because we tend to always have this utilitarian use of the land and we forgot to open our eyes to see new things. Yeah. And then having fanoa as exercise is
nice. Great. I like that. Yep.
This question might be also sort of like linked back, and if it does, just let me know, because we have a mutual friend over here, that have left the silver sector, and it seems to feel that the reason they're leaving is because they don't feel as impactful to the work that they can be or they want to be impacting on, and hence moving to the private sector where their own personal impact is greater. And how do you recommend these people to sort of like skirt the situation, and then the next question would actually be the skill set to polish to be more impactful, which sort of link back to the last question, but I mean different take.
Sure. No, I think those are very powerful questions, because to some extent I think we just need to realize that all professions, all sectors actually have both a highest purpose and what I would call, the less than desirable side, the dark side, if you like. It's very Star Wars, right?
Yes,
There's a dark and a light to everything. But I'll tell you what I mean by this, right? The public sector, when it is serving its highest purpose, right, has scale and impact, right? Long-term impact on a very large number of people, because of the reach of public policy and because of the reach of institutions. So I think that's quite core. But the public, and that's at its best, right? But at its worst, and we all have this, the public sector at its worst can be a bit slow, right? And like your friend said, they might feel a bit frustrated. It doesn't always be as welcoming to mavericks as I think it should. We need a few people in the system actually who are pushing at the boundaries. But that's the public sector. And then the private sector, actually, its great strength is its speed, right? Its agility and its constant fluidity and response to circumstances. Because it has to worry about things like making profits and making sure that revenue streams are constant. But and that's the highest purpose of the private sector. But the dark side of the private sector is that it can be very greedy sometimes, right? Taken to an extreme, it can be extremely greedy, and it can be motivated only by profit rather than these broader aims like corporate social responsibility and things like that. Then that's where you bring in civil society, right? Civil society at its best, serving its highest purpose, is actually doing the idealistic work, right? The dreaming of what can be better, which a greedy private sector entity will not always do. But civil society can also have a dark side, right? At its worst, it can be a bit narrow, focus on a specific cause, but not realizing that there are ripples and interactions, as you pointed out, right, with multiple other areas. And what's the counter for that? It's the public sector's strength, right? The scale and the reach that it actually has. So maybe I'm a bit too philosophical about this, right? But I do think that we need to recognize that all sectors actually have both this highest purpose and dark side. And the job of each of us is we need to find a sector where its highest purpose fits with our highest purpose. And then we make sure that the dark side is minimized.
I think this should be a foundational lesson to everyone who are thinking of joining the civil service.
Yeah, or anything, right? If you want to join the media, then know what its highest purpose and what its dark side is. And the key is this, right?
Yeah.
The key, when you realize that there are these highest purposes and dark sides, for me, it's very important. You cannot compare the highest purpose of one sector with the dark side of another, right? It is useless to say things like, oh, but public sector has reached, how come you are so greedy, right? Or the private sector saying, at my best, I am so fast and so responsive. How come you are so slow? It's like, those are inbuilt, natural parts of what we are. And we have to know how to manage them. Yeah. So the thing that is most meaningful for me is compare the highest purpose with the highest purpose, compare the dark side with the dark side, and then find ways to manage the dark side. And then, for those who are truly innovative, as they move into the future, try and create organizations that combine all the strengths, all the highest purpose, without the dark side. Wow. Yeah. Those are your organizations of the future, and they can be enabled by technology, they can be enabled by innovative thinking. I think it's possible, And you're seeing that somehow now, right? There are these entities that are kind of public sector, but not entirely, and there's a bit of private sector in them and a bit of civil society, right? Why is it that when government consults, we create committees that involve so many different sectors? Because we're trying to simulate a bit of the highest purpose of everything while cancelling out the dark sides. So I think that's quite important. And once we see that, we also recognize that, our job is not to belittle each other. It's to find ways to make our highest purposes realized without giving too much space to the dark sides. Yeah.
I think that's a amazing framing to that. And also, if anybody were to be in any organization, there are always two sides to the coin.
Yeah.
And if you only look at, like the bright-eyed intern who wants to, join whatever organization and say a lot of good things, if you can point out the bad things about, the dark side, as you put it, about those organizations and put it in your resume or cover letter, it will really impress the person on the other side hiring.
It shows that you're aware of things, Yeah. And actually, one idea to build on that is also to say some of your most effective people can therefore be the ones who know how to jump between the sectors, and the ones who, in a sense, are not bounded by boundaries, right? Who can make the most of the highest purposes while minimizing the dark sides. There's actually a term for this. The Harvard professor Joseph Nye, he calls them trisector athletes. Right. So they are trisector. They can take care of, they can move between all the sectors, but they are athletes. They do that in a very fluid way. We don't all need to be trisector athletes, but having some of us be trisector athletes is actually very useful because it allows us to do exactly what I described earlier. Maximize the highest purpose, but minimize the dark side.
Do you, this is on a personal note, do you think that this information or this lesson should be mandatory? I personally, I would like it to be mandatory for anyone who is joining any organization, that they should know this and compare it to their own goals. And yeah,
in some ways, I would also say this though: you need to believe this idea through experience, not just because you are told it. Your boss can tell you at the start of the year that this is the case, but if you don't experience both the highest purpose and the dark side of what you're doing, then you probably won't believe the person. You might find that they're being very intellectual. You don't fully get the point that they're trying to make. So, having it expressed in things like, onboarding briefings and manuals and handbooks could be useful. But I think even more importantly than that, leadership and everyone in an organization, as part of its culture, must live out the fact that this is the case. Yeah. Because then the idea becomes alive. Otherwise, it just stays very theoretical.
Yeah. But I do think that, putting a frame of reference so that, just seeing that like a seed, you know. Sure. So later on, maybe when you have the experience, oh, okay, yeah, I remember that, and then make the connection.
Make it a screensaver. That's actually very powerful. Everybody has to see it every
wow.
day.
That's a good idea, actually.
Screensaver and put it on cubicle doors in toilets.
Wow.
You guarantee everybody will see it.
Yeah. Okay, so it's easy. Okay, this is on the idea of being a cynic versus being an idealist. And you strike me, and I am too, pretty much a very positive and idealistic thinker.
Yeah.
Are there? Do you recall of any incident that sort of like, I mean, maybe it's not one, but a gradual, you know, belief in that, and you know, that cemented that for you, that you know, it is, we can achieve a lot of greatness. And you know, I guess the best way, which is a story that was being told to me, was that a baker versus an eater. A baker just believed that there's enough cake in the world, and if not, I will just bake more. And then the eater always believed that there is the same cake and I need to get the biggest chunk.
Right.
So, are there anything that seeded that?
It was more gradual than a single event.
For me, I think it was that too.
Sure, yeah. No, and I think for me, definitely it was. I'm not sure for everyone else, but definitely for me, you know, I think, again, the sense of the possibilities that my parents always felt we could push ourselves towards, great teachers, great role models and mentors, you know, and just the benefit of experience to look around and say, yeah, actually, there are enough examples here of people who, you know, do wonderful work and can make the world a little bit better. So, you know, I guess the core of it is this. We have a choice about whether to curse the darkness or light a candle, right? And I'd rather light the candle. I just think it's a better use of my time and my energy and hopefully everybody else's time. And that's not to say you do it in a naive way, right? Yeah. Naive idealism is useless. It helps nobody. Mm-hmm. But you must be aware that the darkness is there, and then you light the candle, right? But if you don't know where the matches are, you don't know where the candles are, then that's useless idealism. Right?
Is there any reference or resources or content that, you know, if I can convince my cynical friends to maybe start thinking, hey, you know, might not. So that's for me personally.
No, it's a great question. One of it, I think, would be what we talked about a bit earlier, right? The Carol Dweck idea that you are not just what you are today, you can grow, right? So she says that if you have a growth mindset, you believe that you can learn and continually get better. And that's fundamentally an idealist view, right? That we learn and the world can therefore get better in that process. The opposite of that is the fixed mindset, a bit like your eater, right? Who believes that there's only a little bit of cake, or that I am limited by what I am, I can never learn, I can never grow, I can never improve. But that's not true. Life is all about improvement. Granted, for some of us, it might be easier to improve than for others, but it is always possible to do that improvement, even in just a little measure. So the growth mindset is one important part. The other thing that I think is critical is psychologists call this the locus of control. You know, do you believe that the locus of control of your life is external or internal? If you believe it is external, then what you believe is fundamentally that the things around you will affect your destiny. So the system, my boss, my parents, right, whatever, right, the external factors around you. An internal locus of control will lead a person to say, I decide what happens to me, right? I make choices. Those choices have consequences, and that's what's going to affect my future most of all. Now, of course, in real life, you need both, right? If you have only internal locus of control, you'll be very reckless because you won't care about what's going on around you at all. If you have only external locus of control, then I think you are probably you're going to come across as quite weak, right? And not have much agency because everything will be someone else's fault. And you will not be able to sit down and say, yeah, actually, I can take ownership over my life here. So we need a bit of both, but I suspect more of us can afford to have an internal locus.
How? Okay, I like that, and that's actually one of the questions that, you know, how can what practices can one have to have more internal? I mean, to learn. I don't know what's a better way to phrase that.
No, practices. Say, right? Yes, I understand. Yeah, how do you grow?
Practice or to gain more internal locus.
Yeah, because it's one thing to understand it theoretically, but another to actually live it out.
Yeah.
There are many, but if you had to start with something, I would say that you should start with keeping some kind of a gratitude journal. At the end of every day, or end of every half day or whatever, write down the things that you are grateful for. And the reason this is very powerful is a few things. One is it helps you go to sleep happy, right? Because no matter how awful the day has been, you will find something to be happy about. And I do find this. Every day I can write at least 3 or 4 things, right? It might not be much. Maybe I had a really sucky day at meetings and, you know, got scolded and had various things happen. But I might be grateful for small things, right? The fact that I got to come home for dinner instead of having to stay late at work. I might be grateful for a nice walk or noticing something along the way home. I might be grateful because I had a nice conversation with one of the security officers at my work office. All those things are things to be grateful for. And the key is, the more you do this, at least the more I do it, the more I have found that actually I can choose whether I have a good day or a bad day. Even with the bad days, right, where stuff goes wrong that I can't control, there are things that I have agency over. And so the gratitude journal, while it started off as a process of just focusing on the things that I appreciate, now it's become a much more powerful tool than that.
Wow. Yeah. I actually do a gratitude practice myself every day.
Yeah.
And now to hear that the power and the impact of it,
I think it can be very powerful.
It's just immense, right? And also I'd like to...
so your practice is what? You do
I do a morning walk like an old man.
That's fine. Some of us were born old souls. It's okay.
And I just think about different aspects of my life. Actually, I do it at the start of the day that I'm grateful about. So health, relationships, knowledge, opportunities.
Right.
Yeah, exactly.
I don't think the timing exactly matters. It's really the fact that you do it, right? That for me is important, because that leads to, like I said, the powerful potential in what gratitude can show us.
Yeah. I agree with you, and it's highly effective, and it takes a short amount of time. And imagine you can just use 3 minutes of your time to change your day from an extremely bad day to extremely good day.
Yep.
And to know that you have the power to do that.
Yes.
Oh, wow.
That's right. Yeah.
You have so much responsibility from different area of your job, different association, and spending time to write, to read. How do you wrap your head around that? You know what? Yeah.
Actually, the most important thing is I'm not doing any of this alone, and I think that's really important to say. Right, complex work cannot be done alone, and I have extremely wonderful teams that I work on all this stuff with. Whether at work, right, where I have 3 different teams looking after 3 different areas of responsibility, or in the community work, I have plenty of partners, soulmates, friends, kindred spirits who work on these issues with me, and it's all about team efforts. I'm a big believer that, the old archetype of the hero leader, right, who is out there and just leads everything on their own, doesn't actually work. Everything is about a team effort. And the role of the leader in that situation is not to be, the one charging ahead and expecting everyone else to follow. The role of the leader there is to take care of the organization so that the teams function in the best possible way, so that the different partners and stakeholders can work in the best possible way, and then to remove obstacles. So I think of that as my role. So, I'm not doing everything myself, so it doesn't appear quite as daunting as you kind of made it out to be, because everybody has a part in this process.
Right, and how do you plan your week then? Because it can be overwhelming that you have so many different areas, I guess maybe the question would be more compartmentalizing, and also I guess setting your intentions. Yeah, those are more the questions I would ask, because there's never enough time to the day.
No, there is never enough time. Yeah. So there's a few things that I do try and work on. And I'm going to start with what I think is the most important, which is that if you want to do lots of stuff, you must set aside some time to do nothing. And I know it sounds paradoxical, because a lot of people will say, if I want to do stuff, I must fill out all the moments in the diary, right? I don't. Sundays are mine. They are family time, they are slow time, they're quiet time, they're introverted time. Because I know I'm doing so much extroverting in the rest of my life that I need that time to recharge the batteries. So when I'm planning the week, Sundays are almost sacrosanct. Right? I think some of the, there's some religions that observe a Sabbath, right? Yeah. And that's not the only way to do this. So it's Friday for the Muslims, Sunday for Christians, Saturdays for Jews. But there are other ways to do that. So I like that idea, but I think there are many ways to do this. For some people, they might set aside that quiet time on a different day, on many different evenings. So I structure it with Sundays being sacrosanct. I try not to do anything at all. And it's just a time for building up energy again. Then in the rest of the week, I try and make the most of my office hours. So those are very, very full, right? With meetings, with phone calls, with conversations with people, so that I can get things done in the sense of moving things along, right? Not always doing stuff by myself, but at least facilitating it such that other people have the information they need. That's one. Second thing is when I work on my email, I try to be as quick as I can about it. So reply when something comes in. If I can get it done in 2 minutes, get it done quickly. I think there's some management theory around it, right? Just get it out to people. Another thing that I try and do is I delegate a lot. One of my ex-bosses told me, delegate like you're going on leave tomorrow. So imagine if I'm not around tomorrow, who's got to take care of all this? So that means sharing information, looping people into processes so that they all have what they need and you are not a bottleneck anymore. So all that's critical. And then the last thing to complement the Sunday is that I start and end every day with a bit of quiet time as well. So when I wake up in the morning, I have a bit of a morning routine. So I'm a Muslim, so I do my morning prayers in the morning. Then I do about 20 to 30 minutes of yoga. Yeah. So, deep breathing exercises, a few different poses, and then 20 to 30 minutes of silent meditation as well. So just sitting down and focusing on my breathing and, in a sense, getting ready for the day, right? And then at night, there's a shorter meditation, and then a night prayer, gratitude journaling, and then I go to sleep. So I find that when I bookend my day that way, actually the middle can be as challenging and as full and as crazy and frantic as it needs to be, but I don't mind it so much.
For people who are just starting with a meditation, what can they start with?
Start small. It's a muscle like any other muscle, So just as when you go to the gym, you are not going to start with the heaviest weight, right? And you're not going to try and do lots of repetitions of the heaviest weight.
Is there any books any resources or YouTube videos?
There are some. I mean, there's apps that are quite good. Headspace, I think, is quite a useful one. But again, if people want to start really small, all I would say is just start by sitting down somewhere in a comfortable position, and then be aware of why you are doing this, right? The intention, I think, is important.
What would be the intention?
So an intention could just be, I'm very tired, I now need to decompress. Or I want to think about a specific thing for the next few minutes. And I would say start small. Start with 1 minute. Just set a timer on your phone, 1 minute, let the bell go off after that, and then you realize, okay, actually 1 minute was quite long. And I managed to do it, and my mind actually did stray, but it's okay. I bring it back again, and I learned to just keep focusing on my breathing. And then slowly you can expand it into 2, 5, 10 minutes, 20 minutes. I mean, there are people who meditate for like hours on end, right? I don't. That's not part of my practice, but I think if they can, it's a wonderful thing to do. Yeah. But we got to figure out how to meditate the way we can, not the way we can't. Right? So don't try and imitate others. Don't try and work on that. Work on what works for you. If you find that sitting on the floor is helpful, then sit on the floor, sit on a pillow, sit on a chair, and of course, try and set yourself up for success. If you know you live in a crowded place, put headphones on, right? If you know that you don't react well when there's a lot of light around you, turn off the lights, right? Sit in darkness for a while. Do the things that help you to maximize the chances of you succeeding. Yeah, but I would say start small, like any other muscle.
Just to touch on a little bit about futures thinking, because you're spearheading that.
Well, I was. I don't work on it directly anymore.
Right.
But yeah.
But as a futurist, what should we be focusing more on, and what are the fluff?
For in futures, you mean? I like that. It's a good question. Let me start with the fluff first.
Yeah.
The fluff in futures is where people say, here are my 10 predictions for what's going to happen by 2025 or something like that. The real job of a futurist, right, is to make better decisions today. And the reason we tell these stories about the future is because we want to understand what we are perceiving wrongly about the present. So the great futurist Pierre Wack, right, who was in Shell and then worked for a time with a group called the Global Business Network, which was a futures consulting firm.
How do I spell Wack?
W-A-C-K, Pierre Wack. Wack said that futures is about reperceiving. He calls it the gentle art of reperceiving. Reperceiving because you're looking at the today in a different way. And it's gentle because you do it in a non-threatening way, right? If I said to you, you need to reperceive the present, you might look at me and say, why? What's wrong with how I'm doing it now, right? And that could set up a space for a lot of argumentation. But if I tell you, in 10 years' time, this could happen, right? It's a lot less threatening when I do it in that way. So that's why it's a gentle art, right? Because the time distance helps to create a certain amount of objective space where people can have a discussion and disagree about the future. But fundamentally, what we're doing is trying to understand the biases and the mental models and the assumptions that we are making about that future, and thereby understand today even better. So when the government does futures, when a company does futures, when an individual does futures, right? Because we can plan for ourselves, what we are doing is trying to reperceive the present. understand it better so that we can make a decision better today. So that's what we should be focused on.
Okay, and what are the fluff that people should not be focused on?
The fluff is the predictions, right? It's saying, oh, so your scenario, did you get it right? Did it actually materialize? Did it happen or not? I don't think that matters particularly.
Got it. Yeah. That's great. So let's jump into the rapid fire question.
Okay.
What is books or books that you have given the most as gifts?
Yes, so I brought some props for this because I think that it's most useful if I can share these things. So a few different books. This one is the birthday book, which a friend of mine, Malminderjit Singh, edited last year. I was helping him with some of the support work, but he did all the editing. And it's a collection of 51 essays because we wrote it in the year that Singapore turned 51. And it's the birthday book because it appears each year during National Day. So it's going to be a yearly book. Each year, one more writer. So this year there'll be 52, 53, and the year after that, and then 54. And last year, the 51 essays were all about this question of what is Singapore's next big thing. So I have an essay in it, but many other friends have essays in it as well. And I think it's quite a nice collection of different people's thoughts about Singapore's future. So this one I've been giving out to a few people, especially if they want to understand Singapore better.
Right, and also on the note of futures thinking, that would be a great book to start to listen to other people's story and form your own thinking around it.
Exactly, right. And it's really varied because different people talked about many different things. My essay is a letter to myself from the future, right? So myself in 2065 writing to me today, which I thought was a fun thing to do.
That is actually a pretty good. I like to ask myself that, when your 80-year-old self were to come back and give you advice, right?
What advice would you get? Yeah. And then another friend, Shamay, wrote about being in a food SME business, and she put a recipe in there. Another person, Olivia Lee, wrote a design brief for Singapore because she's a designer herself.
Yes, she's an expert. Yeah, she's great.
That's right. She's wonderful at experiential design. So this I've been giving out to a whole bunch of people. I sometimes used to, less so now, give out my book of poems. My first book, Morning at Memory's Border, especially if it was to friends who I felt I wanted them to understand a bit of me that might not be so obvious in the more public aspects of my life. The collection has been useful. So there's another book coming out soon, later this year, but this for now is what I sometimes give out. And then the third thing, which I've been giving out to quite a number of people, is this book by a friend of mine, Cyprian Concilio, who is he's a Benedictine monk. He lives in a monastery in California, in Big Sur, along the Pacific coast. You've been to Big Sur? Yeah. So it's the Pacific coast. And the book is called Prayer in the Cave of the Heart, the Universal Call to Contemplation. And this is an examination about how actually all the great religions of the world have some kind of a contemplative or meditative practice, right? You might not do it all the time, but they encourage people to every now and then take time to be quiet. And Cyprian examines this from the perspective of multiple faith traditions, because he's an interfaith activist. And that's how I got to know him, actually, through interfaith dialogue. And I give this out to people who tell me they want to start meditating, but aren't quite sure how.
And interfaith, just so I get the term right, what is it?
So it's just interreligious dialogue. They're bringing different people from different religious experiences, or even who don't have a religion of their own, to come and share their experiences and kind of recognize the common humanity that is between them. And what's nice about this is it's all about different forms of meditation, and each chapter ends off with a couple of paragraphs of practical things that people can do to start meditating. So this is another resource that I think is quite wonderful, and I try to share it with people. So those three things, depending on the context, I try and share them.
All right. Yeah. And do you have a favorite documentary or movie?
You mentioned you're an old soul earlier, right? I am as well. So I really like old vintage material. So the two that I have are The Sound of Music and Ben-Hur. Both great movies in different ways that explore human values in a very, very deep way.
Okay, if one were to pick one to start.
Oh, that's very hard. But I think if I had to pick one, it probably would be The Sound of Music. I watched it earlier. I have loved it for longer. And
okay, sell me that, because I never heard of The Sound of Music.
So it's one of Julie Andrews' most famous films. It's a musical, first of all, so the songs are fantastic, and actually there are songs that nowadays we don't even know came from that musical. The song My Favorite Things, Raindrops on Roses and Whiskers on Kittens, that's from the movie. The song Do Re Mi, Do, a deer, a female deer, that's from the movie. So it's a movie that actually in small ways has really shaped a lot of common vocabulary these days. And I think we don't even notice it, which is a sign of a successful piece of art, I think. That it's there influencing us without us even knowing. So that's the film element of it. But the story is just a great one, right? It's a young nun who meets and falls in love with a man, and the family of seven children that he has, because their mother passed away, and it's set during World War II. So it's partly about the conflict between the Austrians and the Germans as well.
Okay.
But multiply wonderful stories.
The Sound of Music.
Yep.
What have you purchased recently under $100 that has most impacted your life?
My second yoga mat. So I've always had one at home, and I've done yoga in the morning and evenings, as I said, right? But I remember also thinking, you know what? This should infuse the rest of my life as well. I shouldn't think of work as somehow separate from my meditation time. So I actually have a yoga mat open in my office all the time. If I feel like I've been checking email for too long, I might do a few poses just to stretch the back again. And sometimes at lunch, if I have enough time, I'll do maybe 10-15 minutes of meditation on the mat as well.
Yoga mat, if anyone will get one.
To be honest, I'm not even sure what the brand of it is. But yeah, I got it from a sports shop in Funan the one day when I was free during lunch. Yeah.
Right. What important truth do very few people agree with you on?
This would probably be the combination of growth mindset and internal locus of control that I mentioned to you earlier. So growth mindset being the fact that we can grow and learn, right? And locus of control where you say, I am responsible for my future. I can take charge of things. I think when you put those together, they can be very empowering. But a lot of people, when they disagree with me, will say, oh, but the system still matters. Are you sure we have so much agency? There are external factors out there as well. And they're not wrong. I just don't think those external factors need to control who we are.
Good. Any advice for your 20 and 30-year-old self, and place us where you're at?
So it's a good question, I mean, I just told you I wrote myself a letter from the future, right? But I actually don't think I would want to give myself advice. The reason for it is that I think life is an emergent process, right? We are all perpetual drafts. We're always becoming something. We're never static, right? So everything that used to happen, I wouldn't want to avoid. I wouldn't want to give my old self advice and say, don't do that, try something different. Because without the things that happened, I would not be where I am now. So I think I wouldn't want to change anything. And I would want that emergent process to just play itself out.
What is the worst advice you see or hear being dispensed in your circle?
Find yourself. I hate that one. Because finding yourself suggests that there is a self that you can find. But actually, each of us is a self that is always in process of becoming. Right? We're always changing. We're always evolving. We are learning. We're growing. And so find yourself doesn't strike me as a particularly useful thing because, the self I find today and the self I find tomorrow might be very different.
Yeah, and also that's really good because you're coming back to your point of the internal versus external locus of control,
exactly.
Crafting yourself is more internal locus of control to look at things versus finding yourself is externally.
No, that's right. That there is something out there that's predetermined for you to locate.
When you think of the word successful, who came into your mind and why?
Yeah, I really struggled with this question, partly because there are so many. And I think the thing that unites all of them is people who are doing things that they care about and that they are interested in and that the world needs. So that combination, I think, is key.
Any names?
Yeah, so the people who come to mind, I mean, one is I mentioned Peter Ho to you earlier, right? This career mentor. He was my first permanent secretary when I joined the foreign ministry. And then later on, I worked with him on futures in the civil service. And he strikes me as someone, who's very clear about what his values and vision are, who enjoys the work that he does, and who, when there are obstacles that come along, he's very philosophical about how he deals with them. And I think that's a sign of real deep happiness.
What are some of the most common misconceptions about you or your work?
Three things, right, that I think are quite important. On the work part, first of all, the assumption that government is monolithic, right, or that there is only one government out there. I don't think that's true. There are many different personalities, different people, each with their hopes and aspirations, and different agencies actually have very different perspectives on things as well. You talk to the Environment Ministry, my ministry, the National Development guys, and we'll all have different views on issues, which is good. I think that diversity begets richer outcomes, I think. So that's one, that there's no monolithic government. Second, I would say the stereotype that government is bureaucratic. That may be true on some things, but actually there are sometimes good reasons for it, and also a lot of quiet innovation that's happening in the public sector. So I think that's a myth that I would hope to slowly try and dispel. And then on myself, it is really about the multiculturalism idea that I mentioned to you earlier. You know, people tend to not quite understand how to get their heads around this chap who is Indian, Eurasian, Pakistani, Malay, with a smattering of Chinese, who is Muslim, but half of whose family is Roman Catholic, and who, you know, celebrates Christmas with his grandma as much as he celebrates Hari Raya. That's not always an easy idea, but you know, the ones who get to know me, I think, realize that, well, it's just a person, you know, who happens to be very varied.
Are there any asks or requests for the audience? Last parting words.
This would actually go back to some of the things I talked about earlier, right? One is to have a growth mindset, to never assume that any of us is fixed and can never improve or learn or change. All of us have the capacity to do that if we want to, and we need not do it ourselves, right? We can get support from others. We can find people who can help us along that journey. Mentors, you know, supporters, cheerleaders, guardian angels, call them what you like, right? They're there. And if we try and find them, I think we can actually grow. So that's one thing. And the second thing is, even if the external world is important, remember that there is some internal locus of control. We have the capacity to influence things around us. Not perfectly and not immediately, but we do have the capacity to do it.
Are there any upcoming projects that people can look forward to?
A few. I have a new book of poems coming out at the end of the year. It's called Second Persons, because all the poems are written in the second person voice. So they're all addressed to a you of some kind. I've had a lot of fun putting it together. It's taken a while. You know, the first collection came out in 2005. And so it's taken 12 years for this second book to come out. But I'm pleased that I took my time with it. You know, I don't think these things should be rushed. And I'm excited to see, you know, what the editing process is like. I'm waiting for my publisher to come back with some cover designs, and then we will look at what that can look like. And I think it'll be fun because, you know, it's a new me as well. So, you know, it's a second book and it's a second me. So Second Person seems like a good title for it.
So book and anything
book
else?
And well, there'll be another birthday book coming out this year, which, you know, Malminder and another friend are working on. But I'm excited to see what they can do, you know, with the whole thing. And at some point, I want to think about, you know, this is a longer term project. I'm thinking a lot about how to bring foresight to more people, you know, futures and foresight work. Because at the moment, the futures work that's done, you know, the government does it very well, businesses do it very well. I don't think we have broadened it as much as we can to others. There's been a couple of processes where the Institute of Policy Studies has done more public futures. And I'd like to see how that can happen a bit more, you know, put it into school syllabi, get university students and maybe even primary school kids to think about the future a lot more. I think if we do that, we start to empower them with this tool of thinking and also the ways of reperceiving the present. So I'm toying with different ideas about how to create schools for the future, you know, where people can learn these methodologies.
Where can people find you or your project on the interwebs?
So I do a little bit of tweeting, but not much.
Okay.
The best places are probably Facebook, where I post a lot of my my writing, and Medium. So I sometimes cross-post between Facebook and Medium. Okay. And increasingly, I'm putting up stuff on Medium, both the poems as well as writing on ideas of complexity, as well as some of my ideas about, you know, how public policy and innovation can evolve in the future. Yeah.
And what's the user?
So just Aaron Maniam.
Okay.
Medium. Yeah.
Perfect. And we're done.
Great. That was fun.
Fantastic.